What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today we have an interesting show. We're talking about convincing your CMO to give you budget. We have Brittany Lindquist with us, and she is the Director of Marketing and Strategy for 8x8. She's previously with Oracle and previously with Contentful. And I think, interestingly enough, the reason we're talking with Brittany about this is because she is a little bit of like a marketing Swiss Army knife and has a lot of experience in more conventional marketing strategy, also field marketing, content. But she kind of sits at 8x8 where she works as a little bit of like a chief of staff for the CMO, which is a really interesting seat. And, we know just from talking to a lot of event marketers and people working in field marketing that they're always seeking better ways to engage with executives and kind of get those stakeholder conversations. So excited to talk today. Brittany, welcome. And thanks for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. This is exciting. I'm a little bit nervous, and it's always weird hearing about yourself, but I appreciate you.
At least I didn't read your bio. I could have done that. I could have just
That
read
is
the bio.
embarrassing. I'm
Yeah.
already blushing a little bit.
I might go back to reading it. You are in a bit of a unique position, right? This kind of, your title is, Director of Marketing and Strategy, but essentially, like you said, a little bit of like a chief of staff role for the CMO. So I would love to hear from you, like describe the role of the CMO, because I think a lot of event marketers, ones that are starting out and then ones that are very, very senior are having to work with the CMO, report all the way up to the CMO, and would really love more insight.
It's a good question. I think that the role of CMO has changed so much the last 10 years. You used to have your CMO who had maybe the brand flavor or the product marketing flavor or the demand gen flavor only. And you can no longer be single threaded as a CMO. You really need to know all of it, or at minimum, know how to hire the best of the best to really look over the different functions within marketing. But you're also finding more CMOs are extremely revenue driven and they're focused on inbound, outbound, probably more attention to lead progression. So yes, you're filling your funnel, but how are those leads actually turning into opportunities for your sellers and following those leads through? It's become way more focused on that. I'm not saying it never was, but I've definitely worked in a lot of organizations, even the best of the best, where that wasn't always the focus. So that's changed a lot. Your CMO is responsible for setting your top line goals. We call them OKRs at 8x8. A lot of companies use that term. And following those through, figuring out how to thread bottom line initiatives all the way up to the top line.
Like that. Few things that you said there, but I'll get back to them. What do you think that we'll say like event marketers or people that are strictly in like field marketing and events, what do you think maybe they don't understand about the CMO or leadership in those positions that maybe they struggle to work with them at times, or there's a gap?
Probably the biggest thing is that your event is a tactic within a larger initiative or a campaign. And so your CMO is seeing your event as a method to engage with prospects, customers, partners, analysts, and media, but it's not an entire strategy. It's just a tactic within the larger strategy. And so you're living in your world thinking like, this is the biggest thing that matters. And it's going to feel that way. And it should because you're the owner of it. You're living and breathing by that event or your multiple events. But your CMO is just thinking about it maybe a couple times a week while they touch base on everything else that they own.
Yeah.
And also work cross-functionally with your whole go-to-market team, your product team, et cetera. So I think that's probably the biggest thing to remember when you're building is that to them, it's a tactic within a strategy.
What about CMO down? What about events? I feel like events oftentimes can be misunderstood to a degree. Where do you think maybe like the CMO and the executives miss on the event department?
Ooh, that's a good question. The further they get up, probably the further away they could potentially be from current trends, or I use the term vibe, event vibes a lot. And I think that's where having a diverse team hiring a diverse team will allow you to always kind of have your finger on the pulse. It's not the CMO's job to understand like what are the hottest activations within a booth right now. They may or may not have an opinion on that. I know if I were a CMO, I wouldn't have an opinion on that, but I would absolutely really look to someone to tell me, these are the trends and this is what we should be doing, and not necessarily leading the conversation with that, but come to me and say, I think you might be missing something here. This is what I've seen work. And it's a really creative aspect that this company should consider investing in.
I like when you were saying earlier a few things. So CMOs are revenue driven now, which I think is a little bit different than it used to be. I think that's a pretty large shift, right? And then explain a little bit about lead progression focus, right? Because I think leads in events obviously very important. Everybody goes to events for leads, right? There's very difficult time with attribution at events and how that attribution pans out between sales, marketing, events, and everything
Very
there.
hard.
But talk a little bit about lead progression and the focus there for CMO.
Yeah. I mean, amen to what you just said about events. It's absolutely difficult. And I know it always will be because the event, your event is your human experience. So digital experience is I've clicked on an ad and that's led me to a landing page where I might have downloaded an asset and I'm sort of passive. I'm curious, but I'm a little bit more passive. But if I sign up and register to go to an event, I'm there for the human experience. And so I think that that part of attribution does get a little fuzzy. But when I say follow the lead and the lead progression, it's really understanding how are people getting into your funnel? And then how are you converting them over to sales? And how many of those are you converting over to sales? And having some sort of metric to help you understand. So your CMO will have a top line metric. Let's say it's like progress, I'm just pulling this out, but 80% of your pipeline progresses to an SQL. So as an event lead, then you would need to try to understand how does that work in my world? And how do I fight for attribution when I know I gave my team, my SE, gave a demo in the booth. That person never even heard of us before that interaction. I mean, that trade show was critical. Now they're taking a demo with their whole team when they get back from the event. And oh, now it's an open opportunity. I mean, that is event attribution. Most of the time, your leads and events will be more passive. So you're looking more at influence dollars over actual lead progression. But when you do know, follow it and like, it's like your life depends on it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting hearing these things exactly from you because essentially a lot of conversations that we have when we're talking with event marketers, one it constantly goes into is stakeholder alignment. Obviously, stakeholders when it comes to event people and the event program is always a CMO. CMO will always be a stakeholder in that conversation. So I think understanding that CMOs are revenue driven, understanding that they are focused on lead progression, right? They set top line goals, and then understanding that they view this individual event or a series of events as tactics in a larger initiative, right? So that's something that when we're talking about this with people, one of the biggest like pieces of advice that it forms into for event marketers from all of my conversations is you have to go to these stakeholders and say, what do you want? What is important, right? So as an event marketer, it's really not about you and what you want. It is about what does the business need to fill initiatives. And then you are taking your event or a series of events, which is a tactic, and
Yes.
trying to contribute,
Yeah,
and that seems a real easy way to connect with a CMO and kind of drive those events as a strategy.
that's right. I think when you're younger, when you're maybe in your first event marketing role, event associate role, you'll make the mistake of, oh, I need a campaign for my event. But your event should be part of an existing campaign that your demand gen team has already put forward. They've worked cross functionally with C levels to solidify those campaigns. So swapping the language out in which you kind of like package up your event for your stakeholders is important too. So this event is part of our on-prem to cloud campaign because we know a lot of people at this event are still on-prem with this technology. Something like that, I think will help your stakeholders also understand the strategy of the event, not just we're investing in this because everyone else is or all our competitors are there.
Yeah.
That's just not quite enough anymore.
I taught a class at Exhibitor Live, and one of the things we talked about was identifying what your company's point of view is, right? And then utilizing that point of view at the events. And I think as I was teaching the class, one of the main things that I started to hammer home with everybody was you don't need to create this point of view, right? You need to go get it. You need to go gain it's
Absolutely.
it's already there, right? So whether it's narrative, whether it's initiative, whether it's campaign, whether it's a point of view, you need to go, like, you as the event marketer. Yeah, it's great if you understand how it comes together and you understand all, but you're not creating it. You are going to get it and then executing it.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Again, amen. I think so many people, especially I would say like mid career, maybe you're not quite director, maybe you're senior manager of them. Or, I
Yeah.
don't know. I've seen directors make this mistake too. They think I have to know it all. Actually, there's more power in saying, I have no idea what our latest product is.
Mhm.
VP of product marketing, you need to tell me what our positioning is. I have no idea what our analyst strategy is for this event.
Yeah.
Go find the person that owns your analyst relationships and get them to input. I think when I first started and I was doing events, I really thought it was all on me and I had to be this expert. And I'm sure I showed up not looking the part because I was trying to be all the parts. But instead of trying to own everything, just be like a Sherpa for your team and say,
Yeah.
I've invested in this. We've invested this as a company. Now all of you own this too. So many organizations make that mistake. They think the event team does the events. No, they're part of a campaign. They're a reason to show up and talk about XYZ new product, make an announcement. It's a reason to get in front of media, in front of analysts, in front of partners. I mean, every single team should own it. We shouldn't be driving all the registration. Sales is responsible for that too. I think once you unlock that in your brain as an event leader, it just alleviates so much pressure. You're like, oh, I just have to go find friends at this company to make this
Yeah.
awesome with. I mean, it's way more enjoyable to work that way too.
I agree. I think it's like you're kind of, I would say, like collaborating laterally, right? You got to have your friends in marketing so they can get you your materials, your friends in sales because you can drive registration and all that. And then I think then you're selling up though. You're
Yeah.
always selling up. And I
Guys.
think something for event marketers to remember is like great salespeople ask great questions. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're going up, if you're talking to your VP of sales, if you're talking to the CMO, if you're talking to the CEO, whoever, ask great questions. Hey, doing this third party conference, we spend $400,000 to be there for 5 days. What is your biggest expectation? What do you want out of this? What's really important and valuable? It's things like that. And then you just kind of create a board. And then honestly, that should really be driving your strategy. And how can you connect the dots from CMO to CEO to VP of sales or whomever?
I think that's excellent advice. And again, like I was trying to have this, in my head, I'm taking this conversation all the way back to when I started. And I think when you're younger, you're afraid to ask questions because you
Yeah.
think that you're supposed to show up and know all these answers. But
Yeah.
how would you know what your SVP of sales expectations are for like your prospect customer split? I mean, you don't know. You can't make it up. You shouldn't make it up. So having the conversation be more collaborative is probably, yeah, that's good advice. I think again, another almost like pressure alleviation
Mhm.
tactic for an event marketer as well.
You know, I've heard a lot of event marketers say use the term imposter syndrome, right? So I think
Yeah.
there is a piece of that there. I think unfortunately, a lot of event marketers are thrown into the fire of events. Like they're a marketer, they're an admin, they're an associate, they're in some role that they get thrown into events. So I think it's real easy to get that imposter syndrome. So now you're trying to get them from imposter syndrome of doing their role into
Mhm.
then saying, okay, well, you need better business acumen to go have these conversations. You need to go have these higher level stakeholder conversations. So I think one thing to remind people, it's a big leap and it is a big jump because you're just trying to figure out how to be a really good event marketer at that point in time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's like a very emotional button you just pushed because I think everyone has imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody. I honestly don't know many people that haven't at least experienced it in their career. And I remember when I got put into event marketing and I kind of joked about this with you our last conversation where
Hmm.
I thought, oh, I'm the personality hire. So they gave me event marketing. I've always been a customer facing marketer. So a lot
Yeah.
of marketers are digital and they're writing and all that. I've always liked talking to customers. And I was running an online community at the time for the startup I was at that ended up getting acquired by Verizon. So a very successful startup. And then all of a sudden it just switched and I found myself inheriting all of our events. And some of these events were going into trade shows that have been around for decades
Mm-hmm.
and all the CIOs. And I'm 28 years old at the time. I don't know how to talk to a CIO, but I think that I almost reduced the reason why I was put in that role to maybe personality hire. It wasn't that. Now I'm looking back on it, and really my superpower is collaboration and bringing people together,
Yeah.
humanizing work, bringing joy to work, creating community at work. And that's a strategy.
Yeah.
It's how you work to find and meet your goals. That's probably more so what they saw in me, less so maybe personality as well. But
Yeah.
and I think that that's where imposter syndrome creeps up, because that thing where people give you 9 compliments and then you just hear one piece of criticism, that one thing becomes so loud and it takes over, and then you're self-writing your narrative and it's not even true to begin with.
Yeah.
Can be destructive sometimes for your thinking. So you have to know that you're capable of so much more than your day to day.
So tell me a little bit about the Bezos memo method, right? So you had mentioned kind of working like a template that really worked for you, basically talking about like going to, I believe, your CMO at the time and getting like your budget increased from like 0 to like, it was like $500,000 or something
Yeah.
like that. So tell us a little bit about like that approach, the Bezos memo method that you used. And I believe you had approached either your CEO or your CMO, kind of going from no budget to like $500,000 of budget or something like that. So walk us through kind of like that pitch, that approach, the memo method that you used.
Okay. So at Amazon, this is kind of famous if you know their work structure there, but you are required to write a memo before you ever have a meeting. And the memo is 1, maybe 2 pages long, and outlines things like what the memo is, the goals of the meeting, the goals of the project, expected outcomes, key deliverables, timelines, stakeholders. The whole purpose of the memo is that you shorten your meeting or even eliminate multiple meetings through this memo, because you read it and no one has to present to you. The conversation becomes immediately collaborative.
Mm.
So we would join a meeting. We would either have it as a pre-read, or we would sit. Actually, at Amazon, they sit as a team and they read it. When Ariel Kelman left Amazon, went to Oracle, he started to use this method internally a little bit, and we adopted it on our team in brand marketing. And I just kind of carried it with me. And then when I got to Contentful, my boss and I were kind of trying to figure out how to unlock this problem. And I thought I had a creative solution for it. So I thought, I'll just try this method. And I sent it to her. And within a day, it got sent to our CMO. And then, yeah, I unlocked $600,000 through it. And I think it's just being so crystal clear in what you're saying. Anyone can Google, by the way, the Jeff Bezos memo method. There's amazing. You could probably at this point use ChatGPT to get the framework. Obviously, make it for you and your company, and you don't have to be very strict like they were at Amazon. But I did find the framework to be incredibly helpful for getting my point across and articulating the business value of the investment.
What for someone that is hopefully listening and either chat GBTing or Googling it right now, what's some kind of do's and don'ts, right? As like, I mean, I also want to highlight, I mean, look, budget is a very delicate thing inside companies. I think event marketers constantly feel like they're being asked to do more with less, budgets being reduced.
Yeah.
So they're constantly in budget discussions and having to go up to have those chats. So
Yeah.
what's some kind of do's and don'ts for the memo method?
Okay. The first thing I would say is turn off your budget brain and start with your investment brain.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of thinking you don't have enough, always have a mindset of abundance and think about how you're going to consult your company to invest the dollars that they do have to make the most. We do not live in a pre-pandemic world anymore. So it has changed. So it requires a mindset change. From there, I would say once you've written this document, definitely get some peer review and you feel really confident that it's time to share it out to the powers that be. I would share it in a pre-read. Someone did this the other day at work, and I probably got a pre-read a week in advance of a meeting. And I went to that meeting feeling like I knew exactly what was going on. They didn't have to walk through every single slide. That's big. The other thing is, and again, an old mistake of mine, is I used to use slideware as a means of maybe smoke and mirrors for things. And slideware really reduces your linear thinking because you're so focused on making it look nice, adding the right photos. I would
Hmm.
get out of that. And
Yeah.
the memo method really makes you think very deeply about your work and make business connections to
Yeah.
what you're about to invest in.
It's like the
So
brass tacks of it. It's like, just get to it. You know what I mean?
yeah, and
Yeah.
make it less than 2 pages because no executive will read anything longer. Honestly, probably most of them will skim it at best anyways. But they will at least go into a meeting thinking you've really thought through something. I know we've all been in situations before where we've done it ourselves or been to meetings where someone shows up and they're like, you think you're going in to hear a plan and then they're like, oh no, this is just a brainstorm, and you're thinking, I don't have time for a brainstorm, I don't even have
Yeah.
background to brainstorm. I expected you to come up with a plan. So just set really clear expectations. Here's my memo, here's who's reviewed it. I always put that at the top: authored by, reviewed by, and in advance as a pre-read. Put it in the calendar invite as well. Like really spoon feed your executives, give it to their EA. Oh, that's another like hot tip: always include the EA on every bit of communication. They will be such a influencer in your
Yeah.
work. They are so
If Ish is
powerful.
listening, she's laughing.
Yeah. And I honestly would say if you're new in a role or you're hearing this and you're just like, oh, I've really been sleeping on this opportunity, set up 30 minutes with the EA right now and try to understand, how does this executive function? What are they stressed about? Do it monthly. What's top of mind? When they say something about events, how do they even talk about events? What's the spirit or the tone of their voice? Like knowing a lot of that information will help you prepare for these meetings as well.
So that's all really good stuff right there. What do I want to touch on first? Okay, so investment brain, not budget brain. I love that
Mhm.
because I think, like you're saying, like that's a mindset shift. And interestingly
Yeah.
enough, at our event, right, where we hosted a bunch of like director level event marketers, we were having the discussion about doing more with less, budgets being
Mhm.
cut. And I
Yeah.
actually wrote about this on LinkedIn, and then I kind of got into it there with everybody as well, like having this discussion. I said, for me, I think it's an opportunity to like flex your brain, right? It's an
Absolutely.
opportunity rather than saying like, oh shit, I gotta get, 8 grand less from them and 50 from them there. It's like, this is where investment brain over budget brain. So investment makes you rethink strategically the approach, like holistically looking at the entire, whether it's program or, I mean, whether it's just a single event, look at everything in its entirety. And
Yeah.
it's like being a really great athlete and trying to get the most out of your body. You're just squeezing every ounce out of it, whether it's your workout, your diet, your recovery. You're
Yes.
examining everything. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there, is that when you go into something, if you go in with that mindset versus like a scarcity budget type mindset, it sets the tone for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think constraint breeds creativity. I don't know if that takes a certain type of personality, mindset, DNA higher to
Yeah, it
be,
does.
it probably does, but I don't think it can't be learned either. Like I used to
Oh, it
be
can be taught. 100% can be
taught.
taught.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I used to speak in terms of budget all the time. And then my last CMO taught me this investment over budget thing. And I feel like it changed my life. I'm not even kidding you. I
Yeah.
also think practicing in your personal life helps you in your professional life. So maybe you have champagne taste, but a beer budget for your next vacation. You can't stay in the Four Seasons Wailea. That's okay. But your family can't afford the Marriott in Kaanapali. Like
Yep.
whatever it is, like just not thinking like I can't have that because I don't
Yeah.
have this, but I can still have an amazing vacation, do all the things I wanted to do. I just can't be in that 5-star hotel room at this point in my life. And that's okay. I always say, I'm not afraid of the answer. Just give me the answer. If it's a no, or you don't have any money, that's okay. Or you have less money, I don't care. I just want to know so that I can move forward with what I do have.
Tell me a little bit about, you talked a little bit about working with executives and going through their EA, right? Making sure things are 1 to 2 pages, making sure they're peer reviewed. On our first call, you talked about like kind of like, you know, I think it's different, right? I mean, my company's smaller. We're 30 people. I am that executive, right? So I'd like to think that I'm humanized with my team, but I'm also definitely not to some in some degree at times. And I have an understanding of that. But then I'm thinking now okay, you're at a 400 person company, 10,000 person company. Like these executives are definitely not being humanized, right? So give a
Yeah.
little bit of like your thoughts on like needing to humanize executives so that you can then go work with them, through
Yeah.
them.
I will say I've learned this through a lot of trial and error.
Mhm.
And at Oracle, obviously, I had some executives that look, not every executive is going to pop up in the call and be like, I can't wait to hear this pitch. I've been waiting all week. You're going to have something like that. I had an executive who would just get on the Zoom and say, okay, go. And then if they didn't like it,
Oh, that
the
sucks.
laptop was just shut down. You didn't
Oh,
even
it's tough. I can only imagine. That's got to be just brutal.
but that world
Oh,
exists in those big
yeah.
companies. So,
Yeah.
but just getting prepared for that and knowing that that could happen, you're not going to win. I think Kevin Durant, he was on David Letterman and he had this really great advice. And he's like, when I was younger, I used to think about all my losses. And he now he's older in his career. He knows it's not about that. It's about just being consistent. The training is important, but it's showing up every single time, every single
Yeah.
game. You really do have to just take every at bat for what it's worth, do your best. Sometimes you're not going to get the approval. Sometimes they don't have the attention span to listen. I've been in meetings where I know they're just multitasking. And I'll
Yeah.
say, I don't think this is a good time, is it? And just say that. And they'll be like, I'm sorry, I have a fire drill. Let's reschedule. I'll work with your A. Because
Yeah.
you want the best energy in the room, but
Yeah.
you also need to show up with your own empathy as an IC, as a director, whatever level you're at, to understand body language is a big thing to read as part of your presentation. If you're not getting the investment back, it's okay to say, is something going on? I'm totally happy to reschedule. Most of them will go, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Or they'll say, you're right. You're right. You're right. Bad habits. I'm here. I'm here. It's okay to
Yeah.
keep them at a human level and get the attention that you require.
What about event strategies, right? Because you've done field marketing, like I said in the beginning, you're a bit of a Swiss Army knife in the sense that you've kind of hit every pillar or area of marketing. So
Yeah.
from event strategies and kind of remaining aligned with the companies, like we said, the initiatives and the goals, what are your thoughts on like the planning and execution of those?
It kind of depends on the size of company you're at, obviously. If you're at a really big company, they might already have the same events that they've always done and they have their 60,000 person user conference and you're kind of plugging and playing. I don't think most people are in that position. So I'll maybe broaden my advice to early round startup companies, late round startups, maybe some smaller public companies. Your job is to not be single threaded. You don't have to do what you always have done, but create a very clear menu system for people to align to. And what I mean by menu system, you need to have like, it's not about having, I don't know how many flavors Baskin and Robbins has anymore, but you need to offer
I
some
think it's like
flavors.
80 something.
Yeah, it's too much, too much. So maybe your
Yeah.
ice cream store has 8 different flavors of ice cream. I've been in situations where it's like, we only do third party trade shows here. What a loss. I mean, especially if you're trying to maybe enter a new category or you have new product, new ICP, that's going to require you to have a menu system that's flexible to meet people where they're at. So it might
Mm-hmm.
be we're investing X percentage in roundtables. We're investing X percentage into owned events. That's webinar series, user conference, roadshow, et cetera. We're investing X amount into trade shows, making sure that your key stakeholders, perhaps executives, align and understand that your strategy is to really meet the buyer where they're at. And sometimes that's going into communities that already exist and you have, low entry point of entry to sponsor a small roundtable in Salt Lake City because there happens to be a bunch of developers that are working on this problem that is there. I think that's probably important too. Don't be the person that comes in and is like, oh, you've done these 3 things for the last 10 years. Okay, I'll just do those same 3 things. Your executives, they want you to come in as the expert. If you're 25, if you're 45, they don't care. They hired you to do that job. So they don't have to think about it. Like the best thing is when you go to an executive meeting and they go, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can go to my next meeting now. Approved.
Mm.
Move on. Like just have the swipe thing on the apps. Like make that
Yeah.
make
Keep
your
going.
program swipeable. Keep
Keep
going. Yes.
moving. Yep.
There's all the empowerment and resources you need to go. So I think if you can get them to that point, then you're going to be really successful.
I think like so it's interesting hearing you say that. One of like the biggest plagues I've seen from working with companies is, why do you do it this way? Well, we've always done it this way. Like
Yes.
that's kind of the response, right? And then what you end up realizing is it goes up higher than them. It's not just some person in events that's just executing like a zombie because they've always
No.
done it. It's people, when things in organizations get questioned, people panic. People, especially the bigger the organization, there's a lot of red tape, right? Even
Yes.
for ideas. I mean, we have worked with some of our clients that are big organizations and have pitched really, I'm biased, right? But really cool, creative, thematic
Yeah.
messaging brand ideas in these trade show booths, and they like just whoa,
Too
oh
scary.
no, yeah, like way too scary for
Yeah.
them, right? So
Yeah.
what would your advice be to someone that comes in, is handed a trade show, third party program, event, host program, whatever it may be, right? And they're a little stuck in that. This is the way they've always done it. Their CEO is like that. Oh, we've always gone to this conference. I always speak at it. Or,
Yeah.
anybody else. How would they handle that?
Well, first, you should look at your past performance. So, if it's a year over year performance chart you can give them, I would start with data. So,
Mhm.
how much influence have you made? How many meetings were had? How many SQLs were created? How many deals were closed? How many partner engagements you had? How many media analyst engagements you had? Whatever. I don't know. It depends on the size of the event. You can right size that advice. Always start with data.
Mhm.
But then also, I think it's okay you have to kind of take your shot sometimes. And honestly, I feel like this is what's made me successful is knowing when to take my shot and how to take it. And the framework I always use is a mild or wild approach. So I'll come to the executive and I'll say, here's what I found out. Here is the data. And let's say I found out that event isn't really performing for us. And so now we're talking about probably a narrative. We always go, we're going to go anyways. And I'll just say it like that. So the data is showing we're not performing. What I'm hearing is we always go, the expectation is just to still go. So let's look at these investment amounts. And I'll say, I'm going to present a mild approach, and then I'm going to present a wild approach. So sometimes it's not performing because your sponsorship was off for your company. So you have to kind of examine that. Sometimes it's off because the event is dead. No one
Yeah.
goes anymore. So your mild might be, let's adjust our sponsorship method or increase our content strategy, or like we'll still go, but we're going to pull
Mhm.
back a little bit so I can put the money over here instead.
Mhm.
And then your wild could either be we're way underspending on sponsorship, or we should absolutely not go. It is my professional recommendation as an event
Yeah.
expert. This is not the investment that you should be making. And just be
Mhm.
crystal clear. But I like those kind of giving them those two to react to.
Yeah.
Honestly, 99% of the time, they're going to go for the wild
Yeah.
because they need to see it like that in very binary way.
And I think it comes back to like imposter syndrome, having
Yeah.
the confidence to go present that, right? Like I've always long thought, because I've never been in those shoes, but I've advised clients in those shoes. Then we've worked with people who talk about being in those shoes. My
Yeah.
thought has always been like, you get this big event machine that's rolling 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 50 events, whatever it is. And people have all different schedules, but essentially, like, I would go to the stakeholders and be like, what do you want from the event? What are the goals that you're looking for? Like, walk me through this. And I would take these notes and be like, okay, this is what you want. This is what we're doing. Cause I know I'm not going to change you just yet. But now I'm going to
Yeah.
go to the event. Like you're saying, I'm going to track it. I'm going to
Yeah.
collect qualitative and quantitative data of what's happening. Then I'm going to come back to you and say, this is what you want. It's what you told me. But I
Mm-hmm.
want you to know this is what's happening. So now what
Exactly.
I'm telling you is we need a new strategy. Are you on board for that? And I think a lot of times they're going to say
100%.
yes.
The worst thing you can do is not tell them the truth. Like
Yes. Yep.
it's
And
bad for
just
you and
keep
it's
doing
bad
it.
for
And
them.
just
It's bad
keep,
for the
yeah.
company. So just stop. Don't be afraid. Um, I
I think
think
that's how you get your budget cut. Like, I think that's eventually like, yeah, you
absolutely.
just keep doing the work. You just keep
Yes.
becoming an executor. You bury your head in the sand. And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I told them, oh, yeah, the budget's not, you know what I mean? Like, but eventually, though, you have to say, like, this isn't working. This is not producing what we want it to produce. And you have to sell your stakeholders because sometimes they're too busy to really stop and realize. And they'll give you the party line. at first.
Yeah, and I think we go off of feeling with events a lot. And I think that the area this conversation gets extremely sticky is with sales hospitality events. And
Mm.
this happened on my last team where we looked at the hospitality investments we were making. So it would be things like, buying out a giant suite in San Francisco and bringing 30 people, stuff like that. It wasn't doing anything. I mean, there might be some influence. Perhaps it was mostly customers attending. It became very entertainment focused. And as a marketing team, we went back to sales leadership and we said, this was a significant investment, X amount of dollars we made into your team with the agreement that we would be, again, progressing leads, right? Closing deals, increasing opportunity. Therefore, you guys are going to pay for that from now on. We're happy to do this. Go back to the menu system. We're investing in If you want to go do a private chef tasting, that's on you guys. And they said, I like that. That's smart because a lot of it for us in the sales team is about a feeling. We want to make connections and we need more of those. And as sales leaders, they're like, we just really need our sales team back out in person again and encouraging them to travel. So it was an agreement that marketing, look, it's our campaign code at the end of the day. It's our money. And if it's not performing, we have to pivot. So I think that, it was a sticky conversation, but in the end, they actually saw it our way and agreed.
You said something earlier and I wrote a note in here, and just for reference, let's see how good my brain is here. But we were talking about lead progression, focus, tracking and following them. We were talking about revenue, and then we were kind of like tying that conversation to events, right? But then you had made the comment that they're there for the human experience. And I think you're talking about the attendees and the customers and people that are showing up to third party and host events and things like that. So I have this whole take that I've really like harnessed over the last probably 4 or 5 months at this point, that like I really am starting to believe that the reality is that events are a catalyst, right? They're like this like cataclysmic point in time that you can create momentum, spark something, whether it's pipeline, deal acceleration, average customer sales, relationship, partnerships, things, right? And I think that people want to know how to do that. But I think that comes in what you're saying is that they're there for the human experience, not to be sold to like you're in a flea market buying a knife, right? Like it's just totally different. So talk to me a little bit about like what you mean by they're there for the human experience and what you were kind of getting to.
I think it's about having that aha moment. So maybe, again, I always try to take things back to a personal level. So let's say you haven't seen your aunts and uncles and cousins in a long time, but then one of your cousins gets married and then you see everyone again and you realize, oh, I really miss my family and I want to be intentional with the time I spend with them. I am going to go to Uncle Ronnie's barbecue after all, or our
good old Uncle Ronnie.
And our conversation where like maybe one of your sellers might have been constantly sending me emails and I'm ignoring. Now I've made a connection with you. And so therefore I'm like, oh, I like him. I like the way he thinks. I want to business with him. That's exactly how your attendees are thinking. They're like, aha, or an offsite. You invest in an offsite, you bring your team together. You've been saying the same thing for a whole quarter over Zoom. It's not clicking. You get together in person. There's something that happens. I mean, there's science behind our eyeballs. Real contact in real life over, not over a screen, that you feel a different kind of bond, that you want to take that energy and you want to do something with it. That's what a catalyst is. It's taking energy and it's putting it out. So
I'm glad that hit for. I'm glad you figured that out from what I'm saying, because I've been saying it a bunch and I was like, I found that word. I don't know why it hit me, but I'm like, I was just trying to put my thumb, I write all my thoughts down. I'm trying to put my thumb on that piece, right? Like we're always talking about pipeline impact and what gets created, and everyone's talking about ROI. So I was like trying to take this real step backwards and saying like, okay, like ROI sounds awesome, but like it's a daunting task just to be like, what's your ROI of that show, right? Like you kind of have to go backwards. And my whole thought was thinking like, what is actually happening at this event? Because I've been to a lot of events and I know, like, I'll give you the best example. It's the simple but best example. There's a guy in my industry who I love. Awesome guy. He's a part owner and the VP of sales for a lighting distribution company, right? We have pretty much always bought lighting from him, as well as other things like Velcro and products that they sell. to put into our trade show booths and our builds and the events and everything we do. Well, I had some turnover in my operations department, and a new production manager in my building wasn't buying from them. And we had gone like I don't know, 8 months to a year, not buying from them. So I was at an event and I see this guy and I'm like, hey, we're talking blah, blah. And he's like, we're 5 minutes or talking and, we're bullshitting like we always do. And he goes, hey, is everything all right? Did I do something wrong? I'm
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about? I was like so blown away. But I said, what are you saying? And he tells me, and I was like, oh shit. And I
Yeah.
said, I said, no, not at all. So like we corrected it, but I realized it was a simple thing to happen. But if he hadn't seen me at that event, yeah, he could have called me. Yeah, he could have done this,
Exactly.
but that was the catalyst. It was a moment. It was that face to face, the ability to ask,
Yeah.
or our relationship. I look forward to seeing him. And I think that happens way more than people think at events in a lot of different forms.
Oh my gosh. And at so many different points of the event. Some people have their aha moment in a demo, some have it in a booth, some have
Yep.
in a,
Yeah.
I don't know, a session, in a one on one, at a dinner. It happens throughout the whole
Yep.
thing. And event marketers, they're the purveyor of
Yeah.
the aha moment. It's a really unique, magical role where you can have strategy and entertainment collide that a lot of marketers don't get. And that's what makes it such a fun
Yeah.
role. And yeah, the fun part can kind of get a little quieter when you're talking to executives. But I've found that once your strategy is baked and you have alignment and they have your trust, you can bring up the fun. You don't have to
Yeah.
hide the fun. It
Yep.
just has to be at the right time, when they're ready for their aha moment, for example.
One of my always favorite examples is is like someone's excited on the floor because they met a prospect that they maybe lost a bid to, or that
Exactly.
was like ghosting them or just faded into the distance and they stopped communicating, and then they end up like rekindling and closing a deal.
Yeah.
Like that,
That
that's,
happens
I
in
think,
friendships too, right?
yep.
Like
Oh
you
yeah.
run into someone that you haven't talked to in forever, and you're like, we should grab coffee sometime. And then you grab coffee and you're like, wow, you've really grown. I've really grown. This is a friendship I
Yeah.
want to invest in again. What goes around comes around in a lot of things. And yeah, it's our job to make it in event marketing specifically. Like we
Yeah.
can't lose sight of, yeah, we're revenue people, marketers, we're driving revenue for businesses at the end of the day. But if you do lose sight of that piece of it, then you're toast as a
Yeah.
team. Totally toast. Because marketing has to have joy in it. It has to be fun, and you have to have entertainment value. And that can be at any investment dollar amount.
Yeah. There for the human experience. I like that when you said that. I just kind of wrote that down and I wanted to get back to it. Britt, where can people look you up, find you, connect with you? Is LinkedIn good?
LinkedIn's good.
LinkedIn's good. Okay. Britt, you were great. You're like a super wealth of knowledge there. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. You're very sharp, and I love the connection that you've made for event marketers and people listening to the show with executives today. I think is really helpful.
Yes. I appreciate you. This has been fun. I told I was nervous, but we got through it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing it. Thanks for everybody listening, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so much.